Okay. Hello. My name is Mariah Berlinga-Shevchuk. I am conducting this interview today, July 7th, from my apartment in St. John's, and I'm here with Erin. Could you please state your first and last name, your birth date, and your place of birth and your current location?
My name is Erin Gettling, and my date of birth was August 4th, 1981 in Portland, and I'm currently in Northeast Portland in Kearns.
Okay,
I
great.
actually just moved from St. John's actually.
Oh, cool. We'll have to talk about that more later. Could you tell me a bit about your biography, like where you're from and how you came to be doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I was born and I grew up in Portland. I was actually raised out in Beaverton, in the Rock Creek area. And my mom still lives out there. Most of my family is in the Northwest. I went to college in Washington and I was a history major. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do after college. So I decided to go into the Peace Corps. And I served in Ukraine for 2 years as an English teacher. And it was funny because my father had been an elementary school teacher, and I never thought that that was a path that I would fall into. But I found that I really enjoyed working with students and the energy they had. I enjoyed planning lessons and developing curricula, and just there were so many aspects of teaching that I enjoyed. So I decided to pursue that when I came back to the United States, and I settled in Portland, and still I live in Northeast Portland. I live with my partner, who's a university he teaches chemistry, and so we've both been teaching remotely this whole time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So, yeah, leading right into it, can you describe your experience with COVID-19 thus far?
So the biggest impact was on my work. Like my work changed pretty dramatically, and unfortunately became a lot less satisfying. So I'm an elementary school teacher, and I was teaching in a second and a third grade classroom this year. And so I'm just so accustomed to interacting with people and so accustomed to moving all day long, and I never really spent much time in front of my computer or even sitting down. And to have my work shift to home and to being just very sedentary was really startling. And I missed going to work every day. I missed seeing my students. I missed being able to look them in the eye and like read their mood and laugh with them and just like experience all those ins and outs of a normal school day.
Right.
And there were always a few days there were a few days this spring where we would be allowed back in our classroom to maybe gather supplies and towards the end of what would have been the school year, like pack up the classroom. And on those days, like I became so emotional about seeing the classroom and like seeing it was almost like it had been kind of frozen in time in mid-March. It was
Mm-hmm.
the March, whatever the day was written on the board, and like whatever the student work was, and like seeing their desks in these tight little groups. And it was really hard. And just knowing that the learning and the experiences, I guess, that they would have been having weren't having was really hard to see.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really challenging to know that some of my students were out there like struggling either academically or emotionally, and that I couldn't really help them.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, so much of childhood development is rooted in those like in-person interactions and activities in
Mm-hmm.
school. How have you adapted your online, like how has your online classroom been adapted from your in-person classroom?
So some of the assignments were able to be just kind of adapted to be digital, and that was fine. Like, math assignments or typing a writing assignment or, assigning a particular chapter in a book. I found that it wasn't the work itself that was difficult to adjust. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of that translated fairly easily. Um, but I think I took for granted, like, just how much value there is in the dynamic of a classroom full of kids, because so sometimes like when you're teaching a lesson or like reading out loud to kids, I would get kind of frustrated because you kind of have to stop and you have to redirect this person, or somebody has a question that's not totally pertinent, or you have to remind somebody, and it would take longer than you would think to get through a lesson. And now
Mm-hmm.
looking back, it's like all of those aspects actually add so much.
Mm-hmm.
It was telling me like who was engaged in the lesson or who was confused, who had a question. Um, and I found that like recording my lessons and it felt like I would record them and then send them out into a void.
Yeah.
And it was efficient, but it was a lot less rewarding. So that was the part that I had trouble translating.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Can you said that the classroom felt like it was stuck in March. Can you describe, I mean, the day that everything kind of shut down in Oregon was Friday, March 13th, and the following Saturday, March 14th. Can you
yeah.
describe what it was like for you as an administrator, but also like for what it
Mhm.
was like for you as a person in that time of transition?
Yeah. I remember that. I remember the Thursday night before, so it probably would have been the 12th. And I remember this seems so silly now. I had gone to an exercise class, like a spin class, where I was like 6 inches away from someone else on this like sweaty exercise bike.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went and I picked up dinner and like brought it home for my partner and me, and like we were starting to get this sense that like something was going to happen, and he had already been told that his classes were going to go um, were going remote. And I remember all evening just kind of checking my phone periodically for updates. And there were a couple of school districts in Oregon that had said that they were going to close for a couple of weeks or like extend their spring break.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those evenings where you felt like you were just constantly checking to see like, okay, what's the update? What's the update? And then I woke up early the next morning on Friday and found out that the governor had shut down all schools. I think at the time it was basically spring break was gonna kind of start a week early, and then so it was only going to be for a few weeks at the
Mm-hmm.
time. And I remember just thinking, I don't think it's going to be only 3 weeks. It feels like things are building to something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I went into school on Friday and was just kind of thinking about, okay, how am I going to get my kids set up with supplies? I want to make sure they're taking books home. I want to make sure, they have things, they have what they're going to need. And there was just so much uncertainty, but at the same time, everyone felt like, okay, well, we'll see each other in a month. It'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I remember just thinking, okay, I want to make sure my students have what they need and like make sure I have a way to stay connected with them. So I remember telling them like, I know you guys don't, as third graders, they all have like district email accounts, but they don't really check them. And I remember making sure that all of them knew how to log into their district email
Mm-hmm.
accounts. It's like I'll send out updates, I'll send out check-ins, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that feeling of uncertainty is like so strong and palpable in that time. And now it's July and it's been a few months. Now it's summer break.
Right.
How are you feeling about the upcoming fall semester?
It's all very much up in the air. I feel like I should be planning, because no matter what happens, it's going to be dramatically different.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that we're planning for some kind of hybrid model,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know what to plan for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
What has been the reaction? You work for Beaverton School District, and what
yes.
has been the reaction or the response from Beaverton School District?
Um, I think they are doing the best they can with what they have. Um, I think it's hard because information keeps changing and numbers keep changing. And for a while, it felt like, okay, maybe we'll be all right. And then cases started climbing again. The state put out basically a series of guidelines of like your school needs to have this in place to be able to come back safely. And looking at those guidelines, like I'm just not sure it's going to be able to happen.
Mm-hmm. Could you describe some of the guidelines and
The one that sticks out in my head is the 35 square feet of space per person.
Oh, how many students are in your classroom
Right.
usually?
So right now, I'm scheduled to have like 30 kids in my class, and I'm thinking, so this would be 36 square feet, but I'm thinking of like a 6 by 6 square in my classroom. Like, there's no way.
Yeah.
Um, so I had kind of resigned myself to thinking, okay, maybe I'll have like 10 students a day.
Mm,
Maybe they'll be divided into thirds and it'll be kind of like a staggered schedule. Maybe some will come in the morning, some will come in the afternoon. Um, I feel for the district because they're trying to balance, their own requirements, the needs of families, and the needs of all their staff.
hmm
They're trying to please a lot of people who have very different ideas about what needs to happen.
hmm
But, yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Is there
Mhm.
in your own teaching experience, like what would you say would be the balance? And of course, there are no right or wrong answers at this point, but I
Yeah.
just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think it's really important for kids to at least be at school. If it can be done safely, um, to be at school a couple of days a week.
Hmm
Um, and that doesn't really take into account childcare needs.
hmm
And it's really hard for a family, like, especially if they have working parents, to figure out childcare for like 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And when they're in school, 2 days, like, so I don't know. But I think it's really important for kids to have those like regular check-ins, both on an academic and a social level.
hmm Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. How are the people in your broader community responding? Could be parents, your friends, your family. How is your community responding to the pandemic?
So I live in Portland, and the social scene here is very tied in with like eating and drinking out. Like, that's what people do.
Hmm
um, and it's often at these hip restaurants and you're like standing in line and waiting, and it's something that's been like satirized, but it's real.
hmm
And it's been fun. It's been interesting. And I actually think in some ways this is kind of a positive change. Like, my social circle has like shifted to other ways of socializing. Like, we meet in a park and have a picnic, or cook at home, or go over to friends and have a drink in the backyard,
hmm
or a friend and I just went on a walk together. And just doing simpler things that don't require going out. So that's, or spending money. Like, that's been a kind of a cool change
hmm
in my opinion. Um, and then another big part of my life is running and cycling and like participating in races,
mm
which is obviously not really an option right now. But the trail running community has responded in kind of a cool way.
hmm
There have been a lot of virtual races and challenges, and a lot of those have been paired with like fundraising for various, for some of it was for like some Black Lives
hmm
Matter events, and then also just for like general like outdoor and conservation organizations and that kind of thing. So um, that's actually been kind of cool
Yeah.
to see how people adjust to being able to run a competition, but I've been able to do it on my own and do it safely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's different. Like, the camaraderie of a big race isn't there, but it's actually been more fun than I anticipated. So,
That's a positive. And you mentioned Black Lives Matter. The
Mhm.
purpose of these oral histories is mostly to talk about the pandemic, so I'm not asking explicit questions about it, but it is an extremely significant issue that
Definitely.
has, I think, been compounded because we're in a pandemic. And so
Yes.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts as a teacher on this
Mhm.
anti-racist movement that we're in. Like, is that
Yeah.
going to impact your curriculum moving forward? Is that is that something that the teachers are discussing kind of behind the scenes?
Yeah. Teachers at most teachers at my school, and then a lot of teachers that I'm involved with in like our teachers association, our teachers union, are definitely talking about it and sharing resources and ideas, and that's been really invigorating.
Hmm
Um, And I'm a member of our racial and social justice task force, and so we're working on a lot of projects kind of like within the district, like some language around hate speech and finding ways to infuse like anti-racist work into a lot of the curriculum, at all grade levels. And so I'm really hoping. It was funny. It was everything kind of came to a head in June,
Mhm.
um, after the murder of George Floyd, and I wanted to do. If I had been in the classroom, it would have been so much easier. Like we would have had a discussion about it. We maybe watched some videos, read some books, and so I was able on kind of short notice to find a couple of books to sort of start the conversation, but it definitely wasn't enough.
Mhm.
And so I'm really, really hoping, in some way, that we are back in the classroom in person, at least part time, to continue addressing those issues and those
Mhm.
topics. So,
Yeah, thank you. Um, I'm kind of just curious logistically how it works. Like if you are having your students read books, how do you like physically ensure that they have access to those books?
unfortunately, a lot of the things they would be reading were on digital
Hmm.
platforms. There's a subscription called Epic, and there are some other, things through like the Washington County Library where you can read like ebooks
Mhm.
basically that you don't have to buy. And so the Beaverton School District had student licenses for some of those programs, so not ideal, because they're reading on a screen.
Mhm.
And that's been a major, major concern of
Yeah,
mine,
I can
all of the screen time. Um,
I can imagine.
So that's one thing I've been thinking about for the fall, is figuring out some kind of checkout system
Mm.
where kids. I have tons of books in my classroom, and like figuring out a way for them to keep a big stack at home and like rotate them in and out as they're like going home and coming to class, hopefully.
Mhm. Yeah, and so much of like this distance learning has been really like hinged on the parents' participation, being able to
Mhm.
homeschool. How has your experience been with working with parents to co-educate their children?
So I'm at kind of an interesting school. It's fairly like middle class and parents with a fair amount of education, um, and kind of the means to help their children more. Um, and however, I found that some of them were helping too
Mm.
much. Um, and I would have, and it came like their intentions were good, like, but I would have parents that would be, if we were on Zoom and I was doing like a little mini reading lesson with like 5 kids, there'd be a parent like sitting off to the side, like whispering in her ear. And so I found myself having to like send some polite emails, but just saying like, if we were in the classroom, you wouldn't be there with her. And
Mm.
I totally understand, but you need to take a step back. And I actually sent an email, I think, to the whole class after that first week. And I was like, okay, we've been at this for a week. Your kids know how to log in, they know how to use their Chromebooks, they know all the technical aspects now. Like, take a step back,
Mhm.
check in with them in the morning, make sure they know what they need to do, check in with them in the afternoon, but like just let them do what they can.
Mhm. And you mentioned Chromebooks. Did the school provide laptops to the
Mhm.
students? Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
very nice. Um, thank you.
Mhm.
So, does this current moment of the pandemic or of the civic uprising that we're living in, does this current moment remind you of or connect you to any other times in your life?
It actually it reminds me of being a Peace Corps
Mm,
volunteer
hmm.
in a way. Because I was living in this very small village, um, in Ukraine, and it was a wonderful experience, but it got pretty monotonous sometimes, especially in the winter.
Mm,
There weren't a lot of social outlets, and there wasn't a restaurant, there wasn't a bar. There were a couple of shops that like closed at 5 p.m. And so I would spend a lot of time at home, or I would spend a lot of time maybe in someone else's house, but there weren't the same social pieces that I was used to. Um, and the other thing that kind of reminds me of my time in Ukraine is like how accomplished you would feel after doing something so small. I remember like in the very early days of it must have been like late March when the stores, like the supply chain was still kind of off and the stores would be out of things, and it wasn't ever like the shelves were totally bare, but maybe you couldn't get that like one specific thing you wanted.
Hmm.
And I remember we were going to make sushi and I needed like sushi rice and I couldn't find any. And I remember finally finding some, and it reminded me of being in Ukraine. It was like this very simple task, but I felt like I had accomplished something so monumental.
I
So,
get that. I feel many of us, I think, yeah, are feeling that way. Were there any like coping mechanisms or strategies that you developed in Ukraine that you've been relying on here or coming back to?
hmm. Oh, that's a good question. Hmm. I think music was a big piece in Ukraine. And as well as here, like I found myself listening to more music and like fewer
Mm,
podcasts just because it started to feel like my brain was just getting full of things and I couldn't take anything else in. So music became a larger part of my life again.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
cool. Thanks. Um, well, we are flying through our questions, just FYI. Um, okay, so another one. Oh yeah, I forgot that I gave you the questions before, so you were able to prep a little bit. Do you feel that your life priorities or your personal values have shifted because of the pandemic or because of the uprising?
Mhm. I'm not sure I would say that they've completely shifted, but I think they've been like, I think the pandemic has helped me clarify my values and align maybe my actions or my lifestyle more with those values. And I've generally tried to be someone who lives pretty simply and like doesn't consume things unnecessarily, doesn't buy things I don't need, but it's, I don't always live up to that. Um, and it's been easier to, I guess, live that in the last few months. And like, I think I've come to see more what's truly essential.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, it's harder to, I'm not going to go to a store and it's harder to justify like just buying something silly on Amazon if like when your choices might be putting someone else at risk.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
I think that the uprising and all of the discussion around Black Lives Matter has, I think my eyes have been open more to those issues. I think I was aware on some level, but I don't think I was doing enough in my classroom around those issues. Um, and the uprising and the discussion around this has I think clarified that I need to be doing more. Um, so.
Thanks. You mentioned you were on a social justice and racial equity task force. Did
Mhm.
that exist prior to this current uprising?
It did. It's still fairly recent. I believe it was started in January.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, so yes, before, but not too long.
Great. Okay. Do you think that society will change in the future because of this moment? And if so, in what ways do you think it will change?
I think it will. And I mean, I don't see how it couldn't. Um, and I guess there's what I think will happen and like what I hope will happen. I mean, what I hope would happen, like I think it should be a wake-up call in American society about the ways in which government has failed us, in which we've let government fail us. Um, and it's just amazing to me how terrible the response of the federal government has been, and people aren't upset about it. It's like people have just come to expect so little from their leaders. And when you truly need leadership and
Mm.
guidance, it's not there. And you're like, it's amazing how many people have come to believe that there's this choice between like bad government and no government at all, which
Mm,
I think is ridiculous. Like I get frustrated with the government all the time. It doesn't mean you destroy it. Like it means you work to make it better. And I don't know. I'm hoping that Americans come to see that there should be a place for like competent government in their lives, and demand that more from their
mm,
leaders. Um, so I am hopeful that will happen. Um, I've also been doing a lot of reading about kind of how our relationship with animals and with nature and the environment and the way we've encroached on habitats, and that's
mm,
probably how this virus jumped to humans in the first place. Um, and I mean, I would like to think that this changes our relationship to nature and the environment.
mhm,
That I mean, we would love to think that we're like top predators on this earth, but we are also beholden to these forces we can't control.
mm,
And like I think about to see more action on climate change, and I think there is, just like this virus and this pandemic can't necessarily be controlled. Like climate change, I think you could think about in the same way, and I'd
mhm.
love to see that connection being made. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I do think, like, as far as like going back to my work, I think our relationship with schools and with instruction will change.
Mhm,
Because I think over the last maybe 10 years or so, there's been this like major push towards technology in the classroom, and this like proliferation of online platforms. And it's like, okay, you can do your math on this, and we'll just sit you in front of the computer and it'll be
mhm,
great. uh, they make all these promises to revolutionize education, and I haven't seen any like actual
mhm.
results. And I'm hopeful that after spending all of these months having to learn online and having to learn on like sitting in front of your Chromebook, that like families and students will kind of rediscover the value in in-person instruction that's, crafted by an actual human being, knows their students, wants what's best for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So that might be a long-term societal change is getting
Yeah.
closer to the the in-person human relationship rather than relying on technology. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think there's a lot of burnout.
yeah, I think that will absolutely be an effect that we see this fall, this winter, and next spring is, I mean, if we're already
Mm-hmm.
feeling the Zoom burnout and it's been 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
imagine how our
Yeah.
little ones are feeling.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. I heard that from a lot of parents that just all the Zoom meetings just kind of got to be too much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's kind of it for my questions. Is there anything else that you want to share about just how this experience has been for you and, you know,
Mm.
yeah, just anything else you want to share?
Um, I mean, I guess the thing I would share is that I feel really fortunate. I have a job. I have a safe place to call home. I have my partner here. I have a kitty cat. As difficult as aspects of these last few months have been, I feel compelled to recognize that I'm fine and I will be fine, and that a lot of people are really, really struggling more than I am. So I try to keep that in mind in those moments of
Hmm.
frustration.
Yeah, the perspective is important.
Mhm.
Um, Great. Well, thank you again so much for your time, Erin.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll have a follow-up interview in 6 months, and I'm gonna
Sounds
go
good.
ahead and end the recording, but it won't end the call, so just hang on. Um,